Welcome to the conference, Lisa, and please go ahead.
Good midday to you. It's very sunny in London. I hear it's very sunny with you as well. So and thank you very much for inviting me. So as Ingrid said, I'm Head of Provider Analytics at the Quality Commission. We're the regulator for England, and I work in our Digital and Intelligence Directorate, so but predominantly in data analysis. And I've been working at CQC since 2009 now, so I have a bit of history there. So I hope I don't get too stuck in history and talk about some of the work we're doing now. And I hope this fits what you were hoping to hear from us. So what I'm going to run through is a bit about CQC and what we do, and a bit of history about how we use data and insight and how that's changed over time. Then I'll give you some sort of examples of some of our current approaches, and then talk about some new developments that we're working on at the moment. So they're very much work in progress. And then time for your questions and some discussion at the end. So hopefully that's okay. Tell me if I start talking too quickly, because I have a habit of doing that. So do jump in if I'm not making sense or going too fast. So I'll start with a bit about CQC. So as I mentioned, we're the independent regulator for health and adult social care services in England. There are different bodies that cover Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. So we focus just in England. And our purpose is there on the slide, which is we make sure health and social care services provide people with safe, effective, compassionate, high quality care. And in doing so, we hope to help services improve. So probably a lot in common with you in that we register services. They have to be registered to operate if they're within the within the scope of our regulations, and then we monitor their quality, and then we do inspect and rate them. So we have ratings from inadequate, requires improvement, good, or outstanding, and we rate almost all the services that we inspect, but there are some that we inspect and publish a report with no rating. We do have legal powers to take action if services are unsafe or they're not protecting people. So that's our enforcement powers. And another thing we do is we have an independent voice function where we inform the public about the quality of services. So we present reports to Parliament every year, our annual state of care report. And more recently, we've been doing updates during the pandemic and how services have been responding to that, and what we see in terms of quality of care during that period. We've been regionally based since we started, and almost 2/3 of our staff were already home workers. So people like me who wasn't a home worker, we've just sort of joined that group now. But we also have offices across the country when they start to open again. We ask of all care services that we regulate. So we ask, are they safe, are they effective, are they caring, are they responsive, and are they well led? And I've just put the definitions of what we mean for each of those. And what we've been trying to do with those 5 questions, which we really defined from 2013, is to try and sort of share that as a sort of standard view of quality across the care services that we regulate, and to sort of promote that in terms of how services themselves look at quality. And we've presented, we've produced documents for the public so that they can understand what they should expect from services and what good should look like as well. So that's about us. So now I'm going to talk a bit about how our approach to regulation has changed and what that's meant for the data and analysis that we produce to support that. So we started in 2009 with quite a different model to where we are now. So the model back then was we were much smaller. We're probably half the size we are today. We had a much tighter sort of remit, and we were very focused on compliance with minimum standards, essential standards. So we had what was seen at the time as a bit of a light touch regulation model. And to support that, we developed something called quality and risk profiles. So we had one profile per location that was registered with us or was about to be registered. And it was at the time when it was seemed to be very in to have dials in analytic dashboards. So we had a dial for each of those standards, and it was also the time when big data was all that people were talking about. So we sort of had a big data model where we were trying to cram in as many indicators relevant to a standard and generate a score based on a statistical model that was developed with input from people like David Spiegelhalter at the time. So we inherited that from a predecessor body. But it didn't have a great, it wasn't greatly successful for some sectors because we did that despite the amount of data we had. So for some sectors, really data rich, we can get lots of data from external sources. For others, like the adult social care services we regulate, less so. So we had a mixed response there. But anyway, we were very focused on compliance and dials of analysis outputs. We also were monitoring clinical outliers, particularly mortality statistics in services, and that actually had prompted the Mid Staffordshire review, which was a sort of key review in England that led to a lot of change in terms of how we work, but in terms of the overview of quality and how that's monitored in England. We also started out in 2009 on an Oracle technology platform, so all of our sort of main dashboards and outputs and data wrangling is all done on Oracle. The outcome of the Mid Staffordshire report that I mentioned earlier led to a complete overhaul of our regulatory model in 2013, and we moved away from just meeting standards, not meeting standards, to comprehensive inspections. New chief inspectors came in for each of the sectors. We have 3 chief inspectors now, and we started a much more a much bigger kind of program of inspections of every service that was registered with CQC, more or less, with specialist inspection teams. And in doing that, we also set up a very different model for monitoring indicators. The QRP, the quality and risk profile, was, as I mentioned, about as much data as we could map. We then had a new risk model, which we called intelligent monitoring, and that was based on a much smaller set of indicators. Although for the big hospital, NHS hospitals, we were still looking at like 150 indicators in that. But we published our risk stratification. So we identified different groupings of risk for each of the sectors we looked at, and for some sectors we published those. And that got a lot of attention in the press at the time. The other good thing that we did at that time was we really started to embed, some of the data sets and analysis that we run into our inspection findings, so that they were also influenced by what we could measure as well as what we can see on inspection. And we did start at that point to do a lot more collections of data from providers as well, and they got quite big, whereas our previous model was no collection from providers at all. The burden of regulation had to be really small. Since we completed the comprehensive inspection model in 2016, we then started to need a system which was monitoring quality from that baseline, from those ratings that we created back then. So we've now got profiles that are called CQC Insight profiles. We've got a bit in common with the quality and risk profiles, and we've developed those for the main sectors that we regulate. So there's one per service sort of thing. We've beefed up our qualitative analysis as well more recently, and really trying to sort of use, particularly for poorer data sectors, to use what we can get from those qualitative sources to inform our understanding of risk and quality. We've more recently as well started looking at quality from the view of a system or an area. So starting with an area in the country and then looking at particular pathways, and increasingly we're going to be working that way rather than a focus very much on individual services. We set up our data science program then as well, and we started to look at what we needed for the future around our digital plan. So we're now going through quite a big piece of work to transform what was an Oracle dashboards based infrastructure into one that's much more advanced and is predominantly into Microsoft. So that's really the last section there. So I've covered up my slides with my face. As I mentioned, we're moving away from Oracle into developing most of our reports now in Power BI, and we've got a number of proof of concepts running, which I'm going to talk about in a bit more detail in a minute. So I was thinking about the changing fashions in how we use data and analysis in our work. So we've got like this, you know, our classic wardrobe here of things that have felt very consistent during those sort of years, and how, despite quite big changes in the way we regulate in our model overall, that there are some things that don't really change. And I've just sort of listed them out here. So the always in, the fashions, I suppose, have been this need for, you know, whatever we do, whatever our model is, there's no getting away from the fact that we all need decent quality indicators that are kind of validated and credible with people working in the services, and move and evolve as advancements in care move and evolve. And that we, you know, there is quite a lot of indicators that haven't really changed over the years. They're still valid, but that we're getting better at tracking changes. We've never, I can't think of a time when we haven't needed some analysis to help us prioritise what we focus on, and that feels like that's sort of just a fundamental. And I imagine if we did a quick survey across other regulators, they'd have the same. This is something that we've probably found a bit harder to do as a national body, but looking at analysis that tells us how quality is changing. So we do that kind of at a macro level, but within individual services and individual indicators, that's much harder to achieve. And the need for us for timely and nationally available data sets is crucial, and that always needs more attention than we give it often. And timeliness of data is such an issue in terms of getting people to use what you've got, and that's sort of almost always a talking point whenever we do an engagement with our inspection teams or with external bodies or with the public about what we're using in our work. I use this next phrase, a one-stop shop. Everyone wants a one-stop shop for all the information you need in one place where you can go and get it, and you get the answers to everything you need. And I think we were closer to that back in 2009 when we had our quality and risk profiles. Since then, there's kind of been a proliferation of dashboards and across the whole sort of system, because there are so many things that we can monitor. So sort of managing that volume is quite hard. And I don't think, and I think this is key to our purpose, we never want to get away from needing to improve information from people using services, and that's really quite difficult for some services, a bit easier for others. So we do run a national patient survey, which for the sectors that my team support around secondary health services, that's a sort of critical data source for us. But in social care services and individual care homes, that's much more difficult. So a few style changes that probably worth highlighting. You know, I'm pleased to say we are using analysis to measure good and outstanding care, as well as looking at the sort of bottom end of any distribution. And that, you know, that's actually, that's almost gone into our classic wardrobe now, because we've been doing it for quite a long time. This sort of focused analysis about systems is something that we are increasingly doing, and the way the health service is being organised in England is changing to have sort of units which are called integrated care systems. That's coming in. So we really need to understand care from a system point of view and what's driving quality and the experience that people have, as well as what's it like in an individual provider. So we're building that up, and I guess the thing that everyone wants is some decent views of pathways through these services and across an area. Our sort of intent or desire to publish what we do is always there. We want to be transparent, but actually publishing risk analysis is quite difficult. And when we've done it, it's taken huge effort, which has meant we haven't been able to do some of the other critical things with our analytical work. So that's something that's sort of, I think we're going to get back into publishing more of our analysis, but or C, that's quite hard to do well. And now it's building on our data science techniques and the potential and the sort of power of more automated analysis and big use of a wide range of data sets, looking for links between them, so being able to let the data drive that's obviously something that's it's not new, but it's something that we're trying to see how we can use that to improve the way we work. So having talked about some of those sort of themes from how we've changed over time in our use of data and insight, just wanted to show you a couple of examples of what we do currently. And I'm sort of showing them to you in the hope that if I was doing this presentation again next year, they'd all look quite different, because we'd have moved on with our reporting. So these are the first things I'm going to show you is just from our what's called CQC Insight, and sort of different layers, different focus that we've put in there. But it's using our Oracle tool, which will go, and it's a bit busy. But this is just a quick view into our service. So this is a maternity service within a NHS trust, which is usually one or more hospitals with a range of clinical services. And so what we've got in here is a presentation of, it's a list of indicators. It's not a particularly interactive dashboard if you were to see it for real, but what we've tried to structure in here is our indicators, and then sort of 3 questions we'd want to ask of any analysis we use. So one is there a national standard or a national average that we should be comparing them to? Are there national commitments around waiting or standard of care that we can say how they're doing against? That's kind of the national average column. Then we're looking at how's it changed over time. So that's is it improving? Is there decline? It's not very sophisticated what we've got here at the moment. We'd like to be using more of the sort of structured process chart or run chart analysis to look for common cause variation or something that should be investigated. And then the last column is about how do they compare with services like them? So what's the national comparison? So that's the kind of standard output that we've been using for quite a long time. And there's always more that we can add to that. And we've also organised it by our 5 key questions on the side there. Then we've got, topic-based analysis. So this topic is workforce race equality. We've developed some analysis with some of our national partners, but we led on this around looking at not just about how does one service compare to another or one NHS trust compare to another, but what's the different experience for staff who are Black or minority ethnic compared to white staff. So we've created some analysis from the data available that looks within an organisation. And again, we're also interested in how that changes over time. That change over time is quite tricky because it's an annual data collection, which means we can't, it moves very slowly and there's not enough data points to really understand that change. But nonetheless, we're trying to sort of embed that approach. And then the last thing I just wanted to mention that we focus on are the individual indicators, where we do have a programme to follow up specific indicators if they trigger at 3 standard deviations. And then we have a process which brings together clinical expertise, analysts' expertise, and our inspectors' expertise to look at, should we follow this up? Do we have a set of questions for the provider? And then we take that through a process of asking them to carry out a case note audit and then look at some of the improvements that they might need to make. So that programme, this particular programme has been running, gosh, for about 12 years, right up until COVID. So we're just looking at what we do next with this one. So that just hopefully gives you a bit of a flavour of some of the specific analysis that we do for individual services or individual providers. And the next slide is about how we're trying to look at integration across providers and systems and pathway information. So I suppose there's 4 ways we're looking at that, and I don't think these are new, and probably a lot of there's probably a lot of sort of read across with what other countries are doing on this. But the sort of public health view is the first piece we look at. So population characteristics, age, deprivation, disease profiles across the country, and what a particular area's sort of characteristics are. Then we overlay on that the quality of individual providers from a lot of our sort of standard provider work, and what we're seeing there. So that, I think that's a drill in. We're looking at Hampshire County in the south of the country, and then we're trying to pull together mapping indicators relevant to a particular care pathway. So I don't know if you can see this, it's quite small, but we are looking at our urgent and emergency care pathway there and tracking in each of those segments what that indicator looks like for that particular area. And then what's that when you stand back, or what does it look like for urgent and emergency care for that area of the country. And then kind of laying on this sort of data-driven view is the experience of people, living in that system and using those services. And so then that's very much sort of field work and structured interviews with people linked to those services. And then on top of that, then the local context to try and sort of bring all that together. It's still quite early days for us in developing this work, but as I mentioned earlier, this is something that's going to be quite a big feature in our future work, and the strategy that we're close to publishing later on this summer, I think. So that's just a quick taster of some of the stuff that we have at the moment, and then I'm just going to finish off with some new developments in data and digital sort of working together, and how that we're looking at the sorts of things we can do to support our next strategy. So we've got some work that we're coming to the end of now, a proof of concept that we've been working on with an external digital company, a digital partner, with some of our digital teams and then some of our teams in our intelligence department. And these are sort of a list of things that we wanted to test. We wanted to test, will the sort of development of a new Microsoft-enabled platform or with other tools linked into that, will that help us do these sorts of things? So I'm afraid I haven't got any outputs yet to show you, but so this list here are sort of a outcome of some ideas that we had and have discussed with our executive team about sort of capability or things we want to do in future. So things we've definitely made progress in this work. It's the first one, which is this live board of health and care systems. So that leads on from my last slide about presenting, analysis for an area, and then being able to drill down into some of our sort of provider, more traditional provider dashboards. So we've started there with urgent emergency care, because that's where a lot of the pressure is in the system, and where we've got some more developed analysis as well for services. The next two are really about how we present some of our work to the public, and at the moment, a member of the public coming to our website can search for a service or a location and then see what we've done, and we present a whole load of inspection reports and our findings, but we don't really have a sort of interactive dashboard. So those were two service areas we wanted to have a look at, but that's coming a bit later. The next one I'm going to talk about a bit more, which is the event-driven insight for inspectors. So the idea in this is that there's a piece of information comes in, maybe it could be about staffing, poor staffing cover, or not sufficient staff, and then being able to present to the person who's dealing with that inquiry, there are these other pieces of information that we already have on our systems, you ought to consider it in the context of those. So one event leading to us presenting other related information to that event. So that's the event-driven insight piece that we're trying to work on at the moment, and that sort of gets into how much information do you need. The natural step is, I need more information. I know this, I need more information. So how much of that can we automate, and how much assurance can you get from, I think I've got enough here to have a view. And then the sort of reverse of that one is the next one, which it's not very helpfully called access to intelligence at the KLOE level, which is our key lines of inquiry, which sit at the next level of detail below those key questions I showed you earlier. And in that format, it's us doing quite a traditional mapping, I think, of indicators mapped to this aspect of care. So, you know, that's a preset kind of mapping, which is I'm looking at infection prevention control. Here's all the standard indicators that we map to that theme, and this is what we present. So that's the reverse one. So one is new information coming in, what else should we dish up for that person to look at? And the other one is, oh, you're looking at infection prevention control. Here's everything on infection prevention control. And then the last one, which has been of interest, I think, for many regulatory bodies or many organisations generally, which is what can we use from social media, what commentary people are making about quality in the services we look at on the sort of standard, the whole range of social media platforms that people use. And there's, you know, some quite big data kind of ethics and not following people through, you know, people who are posting comments, us making sure we're not following any individuals, but there's all sorts of difficulties in assigning comments to services that we regulate and knowing we've got the right service. So there's I'm not sure where that work's got to actually, but I know that's one of our proof of concept projects at the moment. So I'm almost done. So this is just a bit more detail on the event-driven insight. I think I've probably covered most of this, but just gives you a bit more explanation about what we're looking at there, and yeah, what we're trying to do. So it's also sort of making the point that we can do this with textual information as well as pulling together some of the sort of the quantitative data analysis that we have available. And then just the last thing I wanted to mention was some topic modelling that our data science team have been working on with some of our provider analyst teams. So we have a service that we run called something like Give Feedback on Care, and we've been promoting this to the general public to say, if you want to report a really good experience or a poor experience with a care service that we regulate, please come and, you know, fill it out on this form on our website. So we receive a lot of feedback through that route, and we also feed a lot of feedback through, we have a contact centre which people can call for a whole range of issues that might want to raise with us, or, you know, just to get help about what we do. We also get a lot of inquiries through that route. But so that, you know, the question for us is how do we really make good use of that data and pull out key findings from it? So we've been working on this topic modelling, machine learning approach that identifies these topics or themes in text, in free text, and then we've developed some algorithms that look for those and pull out linked text to that. So far, we've had probably most success doing that when we're doing national reporting, because then we don't have the issue about identifying individual services within it. But we've also been working for some of our adult care services, our care homes and nursing homes, identifying flags that we present to our inspectors in our profiles where there's some information of concern from an analysis of that source. So we're looking at, you know, other how else we can apply that across our work and how we can make that, you know, feed that into our outputs to really support decision making. So I think I'm almost there. just left really to sort of hand over to you. I've posed some questions for you to think about. I'm sure there's a lot of common areas between what you do and what we do, and surely some differences. And really just a sort of offer, if there's more you want to hear about on any of what I've talked about today, be very happy to set up sort of separate, more in-depth sessions with some of our teams at CQC. But thank you very much.
Jag vill verkligen säga till er att passa på nu och ställ frågor till Lisa Anneli, och det gör ni då via det här chattfältet som är under själva bilden. Ni har säkert hittat det så här långt. Vi har fått in några frågor. All right, Lisa, we take the first question. When you started working in data-driven, how was it perceived or received in your organization and by the care providers you inspect or supervise?
That's a really good question. So really mixed. I think, interestingly, we have a lot of good engagement from hospital services, and I think clinicians are very good supporters of good use of data. So that's where we've seen a lot of interest. For some sectors, much harder to get that engagement, and so it is quite mixed. And I think there is quite a lot of scepticism, which I guess is what's partly in this question, about the real value of what data-driven can give you, and a worry that that glosses over some of the qualitative sort of factors that we need to assess. So I think we're still in this debate about that the two things need to be complementary, and that data-driven doesn't mean replacement of the importance of professional judgment and what people see in services on the ground. But I'd say quite mixed, but there's quite a strong data-driven approach certainly within health services. The sort of challenge is whether they believe we've got data that matches what they've got, and you get into all those kind of debates.
We saw a timeline before, but I'm quite curious, how many years would you say it took to implement the digitalization and data-driven way to work among the staff, would you say? Even if it's more challenge still this day?
I think we're still there. We're still working on it. It's not a thing you get overnight, and interestingly, the intelligent monitoring work we did, where we published risk stratification, in some ways that set us back a bit. So that was an example where we got better engagement externally, I think, than we did internally on it. We're not there yet, and we've been talking about this quite a long time. We started talking about data driven in 2009. So I think it really needs that sort of senior leadership around it, and then some really practical examples of how it works, and case studies about where it's been successful and where we've learned where it isn't. So sort of not trying to oversell it, but at the same time, we're still like this month we're doing a big kind of campaign around what does being data driven, what does data and insight bring us in our regulatory model, and we've got a myth buster in there. So we're still on that. Journey. Sorry, it's a journey. I didn't want to bring in a journey, but it is.
As a journey.
Everything's a journey.
Yeah. All right. We'll take the next question. What did the process of identifying and defining your indicators look like? Has it been easy within your agency to figure out how or reach consensus on what quality is, what good is, or what outstanding is?
Yeah. So there's a lot in that question. In terms of, so I guess it depends on the sector. So we work in the hospitals data, where we're in a data rich area, and the debates around quality, I guess, will never end. But I think it's easier where you've got that sort of clinical engagement and can agree that. But actually, without getting into too much detail, which I'm doing, there's a lot of commonality across the different services about what people expect to see around those 5 key questions. So those 5 key questions have been really useful in setting that. And something I didn't mention is that when we introduced them back in 2013, we shifted our model from being about we're going to see if you're not meeting a basic standard, to our starting point is all services are good. And we describe this is what we'd expect good to look like. So our policy teams in particular sort of set out sort of characteristics of ratings. So we do have these ratings characteristics organised by, with the starting of what you'd expect to see at good. And then that was quite a good way of getting the provider engagement and understanding that this was a model which was going to be about expecting that, not we're here to catch you out. There's a bit of tension, of course, with the fact that we do have enforcement powers and we do take services to court, and they can be fined if they're not meeting these standards. basic standards. But so that, I mean, that's certainly evolved. But interestingly, in the last 2 strategies, so we've just had a recent consultation. Nobody is questioning those 5 key questions. So that framework is pretty strong, and we're not looking to revise that. I think then the sort of what people would expect to see, there's quite a lot of consensus around those, but then it gets a bit different when you get to the different service levels. And then we've got the sort of debate around what can you measure, and the sort of structure, process, outcome. How far can you go in measuring outcomes, or are you mostly looking at process measures? And so in the healthcare area, of course, we're linking in with specialist societies, royal colleges, national audit programs to help with some of those definitions. So we'll use those national definitions, that sort of national commitment around quality. So it's sort of got this overarching framework, but then sort of gets more detailed for each of the different sectors. And there are some areas which are really hard to measure. Mental health services, outcomes in mental health services, that's just really difficult for anyone, let alone the regulator. So that those we just sort of then we probably do more around what we see on inspection and what the process approaches and people's experience of that. But at the sort of high level, there was quite a lot of consensus, and we did a lot of engagement around it when we launched those.
Okay, another thing, I don't have any deep knowledge about the British law or how people's perceptions is on integrity in UK, but we have talked during this day about integrity, about legacy secure, what kind of data you collect, how you handle the data and so on. Do you have some kind of discussions about that in UK?
Oh yeah, yes, for sure. So is this more, when you talk about integrity, do you mean beyond sort of the data integrity, the quality of the data, the security, all of the kind of information, what we'd call information governance? Is that what you mean?
Yes,
in this
that
question?
was what I meant.
Sorry.
Yes, it was. So
yeah.
Please continue.
Yeah, so yeah, we do. So that's one of our digital team. We've got 2 teams who sort of look after that. We've got an information governance lead, and focused on what data we can hold, all of the issues around confidentiality, and as far as possible, us not holding data with personal identifiable data in it. But we do have that information. We have that information. So we have a sort of data security team. This is not my area, you probably can tell. And then we have different considerations depending on what we're doing. So we've got the whole kind of issue around who can access what within our internal systems, and then what data we will release externally, and how we manage that. So all the kind of person identifiable data, I think, is kind of, I almost take it for granted because it's quite ingrained in how we work and is quite well established. But as new system changes come in, that's one of the things we have to test each time. So we've recently moved over to SharePoint. That was one of the issues, was about access rights, who could see what on our systems, as sort of one of the key things we were testing. And then we've also got panels set up for, if we get requests for information, which isn't really about that personal identifiable data. That's more about what we can share publicly. We have all those steps in the sort of retention, records management. We have a whole program around that as well. So we do have a team who focus on those areas.
All right, we will take the next question. Is there a risk of having too much information or data, in the sense that you don't have time to process it in timely manner? So, what's your answer on that?
Yes, very much. So, where we've got our system set up, so we have, we don't have an automated, we don't have what they call APIs, where you can suck in data from external websites automatically. We don't have many of those set up. So in my bit of our department, I've got 3 teams who are called data development teams, and they spend a significant amount of time just managing data well. So refreshing the data sets, dealing with data set changes, therefore having to change a whole load of our indicators because there's been some changes in a data set. So I think quite often that gets underestimated, and actually managing those data sets well is pretty resource intensive, even with the promise of automation. Although lots more of our processes are automated now than they have been in the past. We've got, like, if I had what I probably should have included was a bit of a chart which just shows you the sort of data availability by sector. So if we're looking at acute NHS services, we've got such a long development list of new indicators we could bring into our systems. And one of I was just having a meeting yesterday we were talking about surgery, and there's a whole program of work external to CQC where they've been looking at clinically relevant indicators for each of the surgery subspecialties, so for vascular surgery, cardiac surgery, and so on. So we're talking about, well, how on earth are we going to manage the volume of indicators? There are 24 subspecialties this program's been working on, and what's important to us. And then you get back into, we want a system that lets us have access to this data, but that we automate when something's important for someone, because otherwise you're completely agree, you're kind of drowning in it and you can't see the wood for the trees. So we have this idea of this move from what was our quality risk profile to like a small basket of indicators. I think everybody wants a small basket of indicators, but when you look at the breadth of services that we regulate, you can't have a small basket of indicators for health services. You have lots of baskets of indicators. So we've attempted let's just whittle it down to a much smaller number. But what happened there was a lot of feedback. Well, why aren't you looking at this? Why isn't this being assessed? Or worse, where there's been serious care failings, we weren't looking at those other indicators because we made a decision not to. So I think there's always a trade-off there. And we've certainly, if I was to show you the full profile for our acute services at the moment, they're too big and they're not structured in a way that you can search them very easily. So that means we've just got too much data that we're presenting to our inspectors and externally. So yeah, I think I absolutely agree with that point, and I think that's like one of the key trade-offs in any sort of design decisions we make, or any decision to look at a new area that comes with it, that overhead of more indicators. Whereas my colleague for adult social care would say, well, actually we've got a very small set of indicators, so it's about the kind of getting the maximum value out of what we've got and building up more of a profile from qualitative sources. So for some services that we regulate, we have nothing apart from the data we generate by existing as a regulator and then needing to report to us.
Okay. We have a question here. You have touched upon it, but could you elaborate? To what extent do you use data in communication with providers in order to spread knowledge, achieve learning, or contribute to change or improvement?
So we do it best with the NHS because we always have. We established this kind of sharing principle back in 2010. And so we've been sharing the profiles that we create with NHS trusts ever since. So we do that for acute services, mental health services. We also have profiles for ambulance. We have 11, I think, ambulance providers in the country that they see their profile, and also community. So where we've got these big secondary health NHS providers, we have always shared our analysis with them. Exactly for the aims you just described in the question, and what we've had, that's where we've had really good response. And we learn, I think the most we've learned about the work we've done is when we get feedback from those profiles, where analyst teams in the services say, well, hang on, we measure it this way, or we think there's a better way you can do that, or they spot errors in some of our code. That's occurred as well. So that's established for NHS secondary health. We did share some profiles with primary care, but we stopped doing that with the intelligent monitoring work. And we've not done it so much with adult social care. And the reason for that is because we're generally dealing with very small numbers, and that means a lot of it's quite identifiable. And we also have like a set of information that we hold around staff raising concerns, like whistleblowers, and we have notifications around incidents. So they have to report to us serious incidents, deaths, as a series of events that we have to receive on a statutory basis. And those are much harder to share easily without stripping out a lot of content. So we haven't been as successful on that with our adult social care colleagues, but the sort of new strategy is to try and revisit that again and to provide, whether it's benchmarking or provide basically the analysis we do as sort of a public good. It's paid for by the public, so we ought to share it with services as much as possible. So that was the kind of, in my fashions page, not that they were great fashions, but was the idea that, wanting to be transparent, but actually being able to do that well is not something that we've done consistently. But I'm very, because we've been showing NHS Trust, I'm very reluctant to stop that, because I think once you stop it, it's very hard to restart it.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Lisa, we have a question that I think a lot of the people who listen to you wondering about. What is the key factors of getting as far as you have? If you can say one primal factor that why you have been so successful in your work with data-driven analysis or the data-driven way to work. Do you have something that you can share with us?
I'm an indecisive person. That's a tough one. So I think it is this consistency of sort of a commitment this has been bumpy, and as I said to you earlier, we haven't got there yet. But I think there is a thread through all of our strategies and sort of methodologies, which is, start with the data, or at least that should be a key factor in what you're doing. So I think that consistency of message, across 3 different chief executives, that's been pretty consistent, that we want to be data driven, that we want to use that, use that in our work.
In the organization.
Yeah, so that has been consistent, even though it's hard to make it work in practice. That has been a consistent message. I think if I picked up our 4 strategies, I'm pretty sure we've had a sort of a message around something like this, central role that we'll give to use of data and analytics in our work, or insights, the word we're using more recently. And that's, so that's been across all of them. And I think all 3 of the chief execs we've had have all been quite focused on the, what good sort of insight and what sort of advances could potentially help us to do. So because I think we've got, and I'm sure it's the same challenge across most regulators or supervisory bodies, there's only you can't be everywhere all the time. It's not a great model anyway. So you always have to prioritise. So what's really going to move us on beyond a rolling programme of inspections, or some or a very high kind of assurance model that will leave gaps. So I think that sort of search for how can we do this better will always lead to that. But so I think that consistency of sort of message around that has kept going, even when it's been really hard to make it happen in reality.
Okay. Lisa, finally, I just want to ask you, and take the opportunity when you are here with us, can you please describe how has this last year been in Britain, and in your role as a head of provider of the Quality Commission? Reflect on that.
Work-wise, because we had so many people who were already home workers, it was like those of us who had to then be at home and not be in the office. That was less of a transition, I think, than for a lot of organisations. It was more like people like me having to catch up with that. But I think in terms of like the way we work, everyone is desperately missing the chance to meet up and collaborate and to do something not over Teams. Everything's on Microsoft Teams with us. So sort of, but a lot of what we were doing, we had a rolling routine inspection programme up until March last year, and then we just stopped. That just stopped. So that meant a lot of people sort of examining what's my role here now, what kind of analytical role do I want. So we've seen quite a lot of people leave actually in that year and get new opportunities where sort of from the work perspective, you know, it's boom time, isn't it, for analysts and for data, and that's you know, across government there's been so many new roles to really focus on data. So I think the data-driven thing, COVID, and the need to monitor it has just pushed that even further up. So in terms of in work terms, but I don't know if you're asking sort of personally how people have been, if you know. So for me personally, I mean, I have 3 daughters under the age of 10, and so my life hasn't changed that much really, because so much was governed by then. So I think, but I think it's been people living on their own people have been really affected, and obviously people in care homes who just haven't, you know, people haven't seen their relatives for a year, and then now catching up with them again, and just how damaging that year has been for them all, you know. So I think it, you know, that sort of initial reaction, but just not, you know, everyone now, it's like, I think everyone's so happy at the moment because some of the restrictions are coming off again, but you know, last December was pretty awful, and the services, you know, I think people in those services, there's quite a lot of trauma for them to still sort of come to terms with what they've been managing. So I've got friends who work in a number of hospitals, and for them they just said, you know, just nothing they were prepared for, despite having dealt with some pretty awful events already. So I'm not sure if that helps.
We hope it will be over soon. That's the only thing we can wish. So Lisa, thank you so much for sharing your experience and all your knowledge. I think everyone would like to thank you. So we will say goodbye to you now, and we will continue with our program. Thank you so much, Lisa.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you.
Thank you.